Okay, shall we dive in? Everybody ready to go? Look at John 7. Let's start with it. This is sort of a sidebar. We should be on John, did I say John 7? John 10. Excuse me, John 10. But I've been skipping, well, we read over quickly the I am statement, I am the bread, in chapter 6, and didn't talk a lot about that I am. There are 7 I ams in John. In John chapter 8, we read quickly the I am the light of the world, but we talked about other things. We didn't really talk about the I am. But when we got to chapter 10, there's 2 I ams here. I am the good shepherd, and I am the door. And I just sort of couldn't get past, I said, I think we got to just sort of stop and let's talk about the door. So if you'll see, well, look at verses 7 to 10. We're going to come back next week and study the whole chapter. But I may go back and talk about I am the bread, and I may go back even and talk about I am the light, because it's so much bigger than it is. But the door, I'm captivated by. Verse 7. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door, or the gate, of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And then he mixes his metaphors and says, I am the good shepherd. But it may not be mixing his metaphors, and I'll tell you why a little later. So I want us to just talk about the door, and it certainly relates to this, but I want you to notice that he didn't say, I'll show you the door. Most religious leaders talked like that. Jesus said something much more dramatic and profound. I am the door. If you've been watching Billy Graham's funeral, you know, the Billy Graham Center, the door is in the shape of a cross. That's what he's the door. And you know what I'm talking about? Here we go. Looking for the door. It seems that humans have always recognized the symbolic power of doors. Just in looking around today, I think the earliest representation of doors were found in Egyptian tombs, at least drawings of doors. But what's the history of doors? Well, it's pretty interesting, and it's profound, and it's symbolic. And architects understand this. Doors are significant, and they symbolize things. We find doors used in various religions, not just Christianity, in dreams, in architecture, and especially in literature. So in stories, in movies, poetry, you just start looking for doors and you'll find, wow, we've always loved doors because they say something. The metaphorical power of this, what is more simple than a door? I counted driving over here, I think from leaving my house to standing here, I've walked through 12 doors. Just, there's everywhere. Doors are everywhere. What's more common than a door? But what speaks with greater power? So I'm trying to help us never see doors the same way again. The metaphorical power of this simple symbol is seen when we think about how a door, so here's just 7 quick statements. A door gives a glimpse of what's on the other side. So you can, at least if the door is open, a big if, but if the door is open, you can see through it. And it's not a window, it's a door. but there's a wall, and to know what's on the other side of that wall, a door can give you a glimpse. Revelation chapter 4, John says, I looked, and behold, an open door in heaven, and I looked through the door. It's just so powerful. A door can, too, provide a passage from here to there. It enables you to walk through a wall. That's what a door is. And all of this is power. When you think about what does that mean, it's like, yeah, that'll preach. That'll preach. 3, it may be open or closed. In other words, a door may make us feel inclusive, or it may make me feel excluded. A door, and it's either shut in or shut out. I mentioned Charles Spurgeon, but I got sort of caught on him. He's got a sermon on the door of Noah's Ark called Shut In or Shut Out. And the first half of the sermon is, if you're in the ark and you look at the door, you're thinking, oh my goodness, thank you, Lord, there's a storm out there and I'm so safe here. So you're shut in. And he makes actually a very strong point about eternal security, and I can't get out. It's like, come on, Charles. I thought he went too far, but he said, you can't get out if grace has got you in. It's like, okay, I get it, but it's an interesting point. But he said, but on the outside, that very same door that spells salvation for some spells damnation for others. The very same door. It's like, that's a good point. That's a very, very good point. Let me keep going. Number 4, a door indicates that something is either about to begin or end. 5, a door is typically quite narrow and small, at least compared to the wall. A door is typically not very big. And 6, a door confronts us with an opportunity or a choice. Big point. And you read people like Charles Spurgeon, and that's the whole point. You're going to go in or you're going to stay out. The benediction's about to be sung, and the door is still open, but it may not be open by 7 o'clock tonight. You know, there's an urgency. And number 7, doors preach a sermon every time we pass through it. I think when Jesus says, I'm the door, he's hoping that now every door we pass through for the rest of our lives will remind us of him. It's like, I don't think it has worked that way for me, but I really like that thought. I really like that thought. It's sort of the sacramental nature of doors. Doors are an outward and visible sign of an inward and invisible reality. Jesus says, I'm the door. So when you walk through that door tonight, think about me. Okay? Consider, and I had a lot of fun putting this together, for example, how doors are used in Shintoism. Barkers. What's the archway in Shintoism? Is that the symbol of Shinto? It's got 2 bars on the top. You'll see it just looks like Japan, and I'd never thought about it till today. But it's a door. It's an arch, and I don't know what it leads to or what all the history. But I came down the hall to ask you today, but you'd already left. I said, Barb will know, and I put you on the spot. They lived in Japan for a long time, but the Shinto religion, their symbol is of a door, for example. The Roman god Janus, the name January comes from this guy, was the god of doors. And in other words, he's the god of beginnings and endings. The story of Ali Baba and the 40 thieves and the closed door to the cave where the treasure is, open sesame. But the whole point of the story is how the whole point of the story is the door. How do you open the door? Well, it takes magic. I'm not saying these are all right. I'm just saying our love affair in human history with doors. I don't know if this is my favorite, but it's close. Les Miserables. It's not like this in the movie, but when you read the book, after 19 years of doing hard labor for stealing a loaf of bread to feed hungry children, that's a bum deal right there. Jean Valjean is bitter. He's released from prison. He goes to this village, and he goes to the tavern and basically knocks on the door and says, "Get out of here, you're a convict." He goes to the inn. They won't let him stay at the inn. He goes to a farmer family. They run him off the farm. He goes to a barn, but the farmer runs him out of a barn. He even goes to the kennel and asks if he can stay at the kennel with the dogs, and they won't let him stay with the dogs. He goes to a park bench and just sort of slumps down in despair and tries to cover himself in the cold of the night. And a woman comes out of the church and walks up to him and says, "What's going on?" And he says, "Nobody will receive me. I've knocked on every door in town." She says, "You've knocked on every door?" He said, "Yeah." And she points across the street and she said, "Did you knock on that door?" And it's the door of the priest. If you know the story of Jean Valjean, that's where everything changed. And he said, "No, I didn't knock on that door." She said, "Try that door." To me, that is so powerful. And so he knocks on that door, and suddenly the story begins. Now you're in chapter 1. He went through the right door, and it just unfolds. Victor Hugo is a genius on how he depicts that. The movie Frozen, if you watch this with your grandchildren, but when Anna says to Hans, "All my life has been a series of doors in my face, and suddenly I bump into you," and then they start singing, "Love is a" what? "Open door." Anyway. Titanic. I didn't know this till just recently. It dawned on me. When Rose is floating in the ocean, what is she floating on? I always thought it was just a raft. She's floating on a door. Don't tell me people that write these stories don't think about these things. And that's when Jack, who the door is closing on him as he sinks to the bottom of the ocean, but he makes her promise to live long and never give up. You're on a door. This is a beginning and an ending. It's just powerful. We love doors. And the Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch, and the what? The wardrobe is a door. And if you know this, and it's in all that, it's just that's how you get from this world to that world. It's a passage. It's a door. And perhaps the most powerful portrayal is in Prince Caspian, when Aslan builds a door, and this is in the movie, if you've seen the movie. And watch these with your grandchildren and talk about them, because they're powerful symbols. Aslan just builds a door in the middle of a field. It's just a door frame. And it's like, well, what is that? And he said, well, if you walk through this door, you'll enter another world. And so they go through the door and disappear, but it's a door.
The later movie where he builds the wall through the waves.
Okay. Yeah. But the question, if there's a wall, if there's a separation, how do you get from here to there? And the Bible just says, I'm so glad you asked. And listen, and I just find these things as I prepare for you. In The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis talks about doors. Apparently then, our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door. What he's saying is, the human condition is this desire, there's some door, I don't know quite what it is or where it is, but I'm on the wrong side of a door. He says, apparently that lifelong nostalgia, which we've always seen the door from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but is the truest index of the human condition. I really like that. In other words, the human condition is that we're all looking for some door that we can go through because we're not where we're supposed to be. Welcome to biblical history. That's exactly what the Bible says. You'll see in a moment. At present we are on the outside of the world, on the wrong side of the door. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we'll get in. You got to love Lewis. Okay, that was all introduction, just sort of fun stuff. That the question we're talking about, doors, is not just a Bible question. It is a human question. And so when Jesus says, I am the door, he's speaking to one of the deepest longings of the human heart. Nowhere is the imagery of doors more powerful than in the Bible. From the first page to the last, the inspired writers talk about the door. Now by door, I mean the passage, the connection. How do you get from this world to that world? How do you know what's in that world? How does man get to God? How does the kingdom of this world relate to the kingdom of God? It's just out there and we're over here, unless there's a door somewhere. It's like, there's a door. There's a door. And this is really the whole story of the Bible, is about the door. I think if I could, I don't know, I want to really work on this. Our study will end in the passage I just read, where Jesus says, I am the door. But to capture what a dramatic statement that is, we must first explore the biblical history of the door. So you with me? We're going to start in Genesis. So turn to Genesis 3. And let me just, okay. We got 40 minutes. I've never heard anybody else do it quite like I'm doing it, but I'm just trying to think my way through the history of the Bible, looking for the door. And I kid you not, it starts in the Garden of Eden, and it ends with the New Jerusalem. It's a major theme. Look at Genesis 3. After the forbidden fruit, and Adam and Eve, they try fig leaves, but fig leaves don't cover what needs covering. God makes them clothing. And then what happens at the end of the story? Verse 24. And God drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword, and that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Now it doesn't use the word door or gate, but this is the entrance to Eden and the way to the tree of life, and God is slamming the door shut and locking it and putting an angel with the flaming sword at the gate. You have paradise lost. And you don't even know where the door is, and if you can find the door, you're going to discover it's locked, and there's an angel standing there who's armed and dangerous. This is how human history begins. And the next story is Cain and Abel. And they're homesick. We're not home. We live. Okay. A few comments. In the beginning, there was no wall of separation. In other words, in the beginning, at the Garden of Eden, there was no need for a door because there was no wall. There was no separation between God and man, and thus no door. God's world and man's world were one and the same. That's paradise. That's Eden, which is what's going to happen in the new Jerusalem. There won't be need for a wall or a door in heaven because God's world and man's world are the same. But at the end of the story of Eden, there was a separation. Sin created separation, and they were expelled from Eden. An angel, cherubim, with the flaming sword was placed at the eastern entrance, making it impossible for Adam and Eve to enter their original home ever again. The door was shut. So really the first page of real human history, at least after Eden, begins with this reality. We can't get back home. The door is locked, and it's not long before we don't even know where the door is. I don't even know if there is a door. That's how lost we are. Is there a door? If there is a door, where is it? And even if I found it, is it going to be locked? Or is there somebody that wants to hurt me if I try to get in? Those are all excellent questions. And don't forget the cherubim, because when, I'll go ahead and tell you the story. No, just don't forget the cherubim. Point to ponder about this door to Eden. Picture a wall that separates humans from God and our true homeland. Human history is thus lived east of Eden. East of Eden, you know, the novels and movies written with that title, they're biblical. Human history is east of Eden. And we're trying to find our way home. In the land of Nod, and the Hebrew word Nod means wandering. Welcome to human history. We're wandering, we're lost, and we know we're on the wrong side of some door. We know it deep in our being, but we don't know how to find our way home. That'll preach right there. I find if I preach on you broke God's law and you're all guilty, at least 20-somethings don't really relate to that much today. Guilty? I didn't know I was guilty. What did I do? Well, you broke God's law. God has a law? What are they? I didn't know He had laws. You know, but if I talk about, do you ever feel homesick? Do you ever put your head on your pillow at night and just say, maybe when you're at home in your own bed, but you just feel like an alien, a stranger? Yeah, I feel that a lot. I do too. I do too. Jesus speaks to that. The gospel speaks to that. People are saying, does? What does it say? I am so glad you asked. Let me tell you a story. It starts long ago in the Garden of Eden. We're homesick, and we can't get home because even if we could find the door, the entrance is guarded by angels who are armed and dangerous. Okay? Turn to B, Genesis 6. And this is the door in the ark. I've already hinted this one. The door in the ark, at least as I'm working my way through biblical history, I'm not looking at every door, but I'm looking at the main ones. And this is a big one, Noah and the ark. And the New Testament understands that this door. And I almost wonder if Jesus was thinking, I don't know which door he was thinking of when he said, I am the door. Whether he's thinking of Eden, whether he's thinking of the ark, whether he's thinking of the temple. I'm going to keep going. Or all of them together. Genesis 6, verse 16, God tells Noah, make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above and set the door of the ark in its side. So that doesn't give a lot of information except there's to be one door. Not a bunch of doors, one door in the ark, in the side. And then turn to chapter 7, verse 16. And this is when the animals entered the ark. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And what? The Lord shut the door. The Lord shut them in. Let's make a few comments. God gave Noah specific instructions about the door, and when the rains began, he himself shut the door. Thus, all on the inside were shut in, and all on the outside were shut out. And I mentioned that sermon by Charles Spurgeon, shut in or shut out. Point to ponder. God's only provision for salvation from judgment and the wrath to come was the ark. There's only one thing to do when the flood comes, and that is get in that ark. There's no other options. And there's only one door to get in that one ark. There was only one door, and God determined when it would be shut. The same door that saves is the door that condemns. God's part in salvation is to provide the ark and open the door. Man's part is to enter in. Did you learn this song in Vacation Bible School? One door and only one, and yet its sides are two, inside and outside. On which side are you? Only a few of you did. That takes me way back. But it's one door and only one, and yet its sides are two, inside and outside. On which side are you? Okay, can we keep moving? What I'm trying to do is big picture, so we don't want to just get caught. We've seen the door to Eden that is locked and lost. We've lost that door. We've seen the door to the ark that God said, make a door, and God determined when the door was shut. That's very important. That wasn't Moses' decision. Moses probably would have said, can't we leave it longer? Maybe somebody else wants to come in. You should hear Charles Spurgeon preach this. When he got to shutting the door part, he said, I can't even talk about this without weeping. And he said, because I'm looking at people, and you're on the wrong side of the door. And I can't bear the thought that the door would be shut and you're not in. It's powerful. Third door. The C is the door at the Tower of Babel. This one escaped me for a while. But let's turn to it. Anybody have a study Bible with the reference for what the word Babel or Babylon means? In Hebrew, it sounds like the word confusion. But in Akkadian, I think or it's Sumerian, Babel and Babylon had another meaning. And it's very clearly what's going on here. Anybody got a study Bible to see it? Gate of God. Very good. Yes, gate of God. Door, gate. Babel and the tower, and this escaped me for years. It's not just let's build a skyscraper. It's no, let's reach the gate of heaven. That's what we're doing, and we're going to do it. We're going to build, we're going to work, we're going to organize so that our efforts can reach the door and we can be with God and like God, and that's what it's going on. I don't think I'm going to read the story. I think you know the story. Let me read my comments, okay? What happened? They built the tower. It didn't reach heaven. I mean, it didn't come close to reaching them. It's like, how it didn't even come close. God judged them and confused them. This is where they started speaking other language. So the result of this human effort to find heaven's gate is judgment and confusion. The multinational effort to build a tower with its top in the heavens was an impressive effort to reach heaven's gate. The Akkadian name Babilu meant gate of God. However, God was displeased with such arrogance and confused their speech and ended the futile project. Point to ponder. The story of the Tower of Babel is meant to be an unforgettable object lesson showing the futility of all human efforts to find the doorway that enables us to live in fellowship with God. Those who are brazen enough to claim to be able to reach heaven's gate by their own noble efforts invite divine judgment, and the work will end in confusion. And human history has many examples. I've given you one at the bottom that most of us can probably remember. Footnote 2. A tragic illustration is the California cult named Heaven's Gate, founded by Marshall Applewhite on March 26, 1997. 39 members of this cult participated in a mass suicide in hopes that they might reach an extraterrestrial spaceship that was supposedly passing by in conjunction with the Hale-Bopp comet. Remember that? They were all wearing tennis shoes, and it was big news. And it's Heaven's Gate. That's the name of the cult. Heaven's Door. And they thought they could get there. That's exactly what Babel was. We think we found a way to get there. And it's like, it's awful. It's frightening, terrifying. It's judgment, it's confusion is the result. I forgot the other footnote talking about the door of the ark. How many of you have been to the Ark Encounter in Williamstown? The Noah's Ark? Not, wow, I've been. Yeah, it's very interesting. There are a bunch of young earth creationists. You can talk about all you want. But they've got a life replica of the ark. And one of the things that was unforgettable when you go through it and you walk through it is the door. And on the inside, it's shut, but they've got this, it's got the plan of salvation just written right out there for every tourist. Say, this is the door. And it was shut. And what does the door mean? And who is the door? And how do you get in the ark? How do you escape judgment? How do you find God? It's just, and it's just life size. And you picture the storm. You picture the animals, the smells, the safety, the terror, the hearing people outside the door that aren't in. I mean, it works. It's powerful. Okay. Can we keep going? We're doing good. D, the door at the top of Jacob's ladder. And again, I think I was in my 50s before I connected the Tower of Babel to Jaden's ladder. Look at Genesis 28. You know this story, but let me remind you of just what's in the text. Jacob is running away from home. His brother wants to kill him. Jacob is a no-good, low-down, dirty, rotten bum. I mean, he's just a rascal. But he lays down and puts a stone under his head for a pillow. Verse 12. And he dreamed, and behold, there was what's your Bible say? A ladder, probably a staircase is better. But mine says ladder, but a connection from earth to heaven. So this is a apparatus, for lack of a better word, that actually reached heaven's gate. Babel didn't reach heaven's gate. This one did. The ladder sat up on the earth, and at the top it reached heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending. In other words, you can go through the door, back and forth, from this world to that world. There is a door. It's open. It's working. Babel didn't reach it, not even close, but this one does. That's why Jacob's ladder is so important. And the Lord stood above it, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father. Skip down to verse 16. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. That's a pretty funny statement. You know, how can the God of the universe be in the same room with me and I'm unaware that he's there? Well, if you're Jacob, that kind of thing happens all the time. And I think he's saying this ladder that connects earth to God has always been there. I just have never seen it until God opened my eyes. That's right. That's right. That's right. Verse 17, and he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is what? This is the door. This is the door. This is the door we've been looking for since Eden. There it is, and it works. And there's a connection. There's a ladder that goes all the way from the reprobate I am to the Holy One. That's pretty revolutionary stuff. Now, a few comments. few comments. Jacob's ladder, or stairways, succeeded, and remember, if you're old enough like me, Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. Stairway to Heaven. What are they singing about? What are they singing about? I went back and checked the words, and it's sort of hard to find the words, what they're meaning, but they're talking about a stairway that reaches to heaven. This is hard rock, 1970 hippie culture, but it's like people love the door. We can't get away from it. How do you get there? The stairway was, Jacob's ladder succeeded where Babel's tower failed. This stairway was not built by man, but by who? God. The folks at Babel, you can keep adding meters and feet to your tower. You will never, ever reach the gate of heaven. You won't even come close. But if God builds not a tower up, but a ladder down, it'll reach you in the deepest pit, where even if you're a rascal like Jacob. Really? God does that? You mean God opens the door and God creates the connection? Yeah. There's no other way to know Him. It's a wall without that. The angels going back and forth illustrated the mind-boggling possibility of being able to communicate with God. Jacob exclaimed, "This is the gate of heaven." Point to ponder. Apparently, this stairway to God had always been there, but Jacob, in his blindness, had not seen it. That's a pretty important lesson to preach. The problem is not that God hasn't opened a way and a door. The problem is that we're so blind we can't see it. Now, note especially, this is big. We alluded to this 6 weeks ago or so in John chapter 1. Note especially how Jesus uses the story of Jacob's ladder to explain to Nathanael in John chapter 1 both who he is and why he came. Quote, "You will see, Nathanael, you'll see heaven opened," in other words, the door opened, "and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." In other words, the Son of Man, Jesus, is the ladder. He is the stairway. He is the door. He doesn't just point to the door. He is the door. Okay? Let's talk about E, the door of the tabernacle. I don't think we're going to look up any of these. There's a bunch of references, but you've got the references. The tabernacle was designed by God. God is the architect, to illustrate how His redeemed people could live in daily fellowship with Him. There were actually 3 doors or entrances or gates or curtains, not in 3 different places, but 3 in a line. You go through one door, which leads to the next door, which leads to the next door, which lead progressively closer and closer to the presence of God. Number 1, the gate in the courtyard. So around the courtyard there was a fence, I think about 6 feet tall, not real tall, and on the east there was one door and only one to get in the temple. Only one door to the temple. The Baha'i Temple in Wilmette, Illinois. Anybody ever been to the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette, Illinois? It has 9 doors. It's like, what a beautiful symbol. 9 doors, one for the Shintos, one for the Buddhists, one for the Hindus, one for the Jews. And they all lead to the same place. All roads lead to God. All doors lead to God, says the Baha'i faith. They don't. They don't. It's a beautiful thought, and in a postmodern world, people love that kind of mushy, I hope it's true kind of thought, but the temple And you compare the temple's architecture to the Baha'i temple, and it's like, these are theological statements to the depths. There's one door to the temple. You can't get in the temple unless you go in one door. On the eastern side of the fence that surrounded the tabernacle was a single gate. It was made of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen embroidered with needlework. Number 2, the door to the tabernacle. The door. So you've come in the gate, then you go past the altar and the laver, and then there's the tent of the tabernacle, and there's a door. The entrance to the holy place included 5 pillars. This was also made of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. Then if you went through, if you were a priest, went through the holy place, where there was the lamp and the altar of incense, then there was the big veil. And then it wasn't 6 feet tall, it was a perfect square. And nobody went behind that door except the high priest once a year on the day of Yom Kippur. But that's where God was, behind that door. The veil designated the most holy place. The massive curtain was made of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, but it had an additional feature. It shall be made with cherubim. I told you to remember that word. That's who's guarding the gate to the tree of life and the Garden of Eden. Put cherubim on the veil of the temple to remind you that you cannot, God's back there and the way is closed, and cherubim are guarding the way to the tree of life. Behind this veil was placed the Ark of the Covenant, where the presence of God resided. Point to ponder. When Jesus died on the cross, the veil of the temple was torn into, anybody know the quote? From top to bottom. Why in the world would Matthew add that? And I think because there's only, how do you explain it was, that it was torn at all would be hard to explain, but from top to bottom, it's God is opening up the way. The door is open because of what happened on the cross. It's like, really? Those are connected? Theologically, this meant that believers now can come boldly into the very throne room of God. Listen to Hebrews. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way. And it doesn't use the word door, but the word way there has the same connotation. Opened for us through the curtain, that is, His body. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. So Jesus opened the door. Ezekiel's temple is F. The door to Ezekiel's temple. I'd love to spend time on this, but let me try to introduce you to it. Well, I got to show you something. Turn to Ezekiel 47. Ezekiel had a vision of the new temple. And he had his vision when the old temple that had been built by Solomon, that had been modeled after the tabernacle, was destroyed. So Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed the temple, and Ezekiel has a vision of a new temple that was never built. Herod's temple that was built was sort of more like Solomon's temple. I get a little confused on some of this, but they all had doors. And what the temple does with doors is very important. Just like in all architecture, doors are very important. Doors speak. Look at chapter 47. You just Then he, this is the man showing Ezekiel in his vision, the temple. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple. This is the door that faces east from Jerusalem. It's the door that faces the Dead Sea, which is about, 1,500 feet below them. I mean, it's downhill from the temple to the Dead Sea. Remember that. The door of the temple, and behold, water was coming from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. So he sees the temple, there's the door of the temple, but water, a lot of water, is flowing under the door. So there's an association between water and door. Jesus thought that way. He said, not only did he say, I am the door, he said, I offer living water. And I'm sure he was thinking of this. And this water is coming under the threshold. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate, led me around on the outside to the outer gate that faces toward the east. And behold, the water was trickling, so it's just a trickle. Going on eastward with the measuring line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits and led me through the water. And now it's ankle deep. And he measured 1,000 cubits and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Now notice there's no tributaries coming into the water, but the water's getting wider and deeper, but it's just coming out of the temple. How does that happen? Welcome to the temple of God. You're not in Kansas anymore. And he measured 1,000 and led me through the water. Now it's waist deep. Again he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be passed through. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he led me back, and I saw on the bank of the river very many trees, one on one side and the other. Now, we're in the desert, but this water makes things grow. This water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah and enters the Dead Sea. Not the Sea of God, it enters the Dead Sea, and when the water flows into the sea, the water becomes fresh. And wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be many fish. In other words, when the water from the temple reaches the Dead Sea is no longer dead. It's no longer salty, and suddenly it's like an oasis. Here's just an interesting, I've got to learn how to preach this. Every great capital city in history, I think, has been built on a river. Nineveh, Babylon, Cairo, Rome, London, Paris, Washington, Moscow. Yeah, you have a hard time finding a capital that's not on a river, except Jerusalem. Jerusalem has no river. And yet in the Psalms, and if you remember Jimmy Swaggart, of all people, there is a river. That's a moving song. There is a river that flows from Calvary's side. Jerusalem does have a river, but it ain't like no other river you've ever seen. And Ezekiel sees it. Ezekiel sees it. God's geography is powerful. But it all relates to the temple door. The door of the temple, the door to the presence of God and life-giving water. In John chapter 7, Jesus said, if anybody's thirsty, come to me and drink. Because I'm the temple, I'm the door, I'm the water, I'm the bread, I'm the light. It's like, who are you? Who are you? That's, okay. All right. Point to ponder. This passage connects the door and water. Jesus was very conscious of this connection. Notice how the water that flows under the door increases both in depth and breadth as it flows, though it has no tributaries. Notice how this water both heals and gives life. And it comes from the door. The door in the door in Revelation. Let me just read this to you. You can look up the references. John's vision at the end of human history includes several doors. He sees a door standing open in heaven in chapter 4. Looking inside, and he doesn't go in, it says he looked in the door. It's like it gave him the ability to see what's going on the other side. And he sees a worship service going on of cosmic proportions. Then in chapter 19, when Christ returns in power and glory, when he's riding on a white horse with a sword coming out of his mouth, he comes through that door. And an army's with him. So John just looks at heaven and he sees a door open. He sees worship, and then a little later in the vision, here comes the king, the return of the king. I know Tolkien got that title for the 3rd volume of Lord of the Rings from the book of Revelation, the return of the king. And he's going to come through that door. He's going to come, and he's riding on he's not riding a donkey this time. And he's not meek and mild this time. He's in power and glory. Every eye will see him. When Christ returns in power and glory, he will come through that open door. And then the kingdom of this world will become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. That's the verse in Handel's Messiah. The kingdoms of this world. And because the king has come. And he's come through the door from that world to this world. And this world becomes his world again. It always was, but ever since the Garden of Eden, the door's been shut, and we've tried to sort of figure it out without him. But he's coming back through the door. It's such a good story. And it's true. That's the best part. As the new Jerusalem descends like a bride adorned for her wedding day, we realize that the wall of separation has disappeared. And creation and the redeemed are once again united in fellowship with God, a sort of reestablishment of the Garden of Eden, and once again men and women have access to the tree of life. And in the New Jerusalem, there's a river, and on the sides of the river there are trees, and the leaves are for the healing of the nations. What a beautiful statement. But there's no door as such, because we're all with God, and the kingdom of this world has become his kingdom. The Bible doesn't really talk about us going up to heaven. The Bible talks about heaven coming down to earth. You read it and tell me I'm wrong on this. We get it, we don't think right. Point to ponder. When Christ returns to establish his kingdom on earth, there will be no need for a door, because the redeemed are shut in with him in intimate fellowship forever. The only door in Revelation, at least at this point, that I see that remains is the one that leads to hell. And you may remember Jesus says, I hold the keys to hell. When he shuts the door, just like when God shut the door of the ark, it's over. And when God throws Satan and his hosts in the bottomless pit, the door is locked. And that's how the story ends. They're behind the door, but now we're inside the door. We're in the ark. Again, I want to learn how to say this. The redeemed are shut in with God, and the lost are shut out forever. There are some references. You can look it up. So, we're right on time. H, Jesus is the door. So I think when Jesus in John 10 says, I am the door, we're supposed to think of what I've been saying for the last 60 minutes. It's like all of that paradise, ark, Tower of Babel that didn't reach the door, Jacob's ladder. Jesus even is the ladder, the temple, Ezekiel, water coming out. Jesus is coming back through the door. And Jesus just sort of majestically sums it all up in 4 single-syllable words. I am the door. And you're just sort of saying, wow. Jesus not only shows the door, he is the door. Just as a shepherd lays down, in the verse after Jesus says, I am the door, he says, I am the good shepherd. And probably what he's talking about is when the shepherd took the sheep into the wilderness, and they had to build an enclosure for the night with brambles and stones or whatever. They didn't have like a door on hinges. And so the shepherd himself would literally sleep in the door. He was the door, and he kept the sheep in the fold by sleeping there, and he kept the predators out. He was in the door. He was the door. So I don't think Jesus really was mixing his metaphors when he said, I am the door, I'm the good shepherd. It's 2 ways of saying the same thing. And then he's going to say, and I give my life for the sheep. Because there are thieves and predators that want to eat my sheep for lunch. Yes, that's true. So Jesus is himself the doorway. He is Jacob's ladder. He's the way, the only way. No one comes to the Father except through him. Point to ponder. Though the way may seem narrow and hard. Matthew 7 is where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, the way is broad and the way is the gate is broad and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who find it are many. And the way is narrow. No, the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. And those who find it are few. Though the way may seem narrow and hard, this is the door that leads to abundant. I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. Conclusion. So all of that is introduction. Here's my sermon. And I can preach it in 2 minutes. And it'll have punch. There is a door. Don't let anybody tell you there's no door. It really, truly exists. There's a point of access between our world and God, between me and God. Yes, there's a wall of separation that's broad and high, but there is a door. B, the door is open. Today's the day of grace. You can go in, you can go through. C, there's only one door, and it is narrow and hard. The hardness does not relate to human effort or good works. It's hard because it's hard to accept. The narrow door means I can't take any baggage or possessions along with me, and I must be small enough to get through. I sort of thought of that all by myself, but it's a small door. Only children get in. I think I told you I love this picture at Six Flags, where I used to go growing up over Georgia. At the entrance to the rides, there was always this little cardboard man and said, you must be this tall to get in this ride, and all the kids are running up measuring themselves. I think when we get to heaven, I sort of picture a little cardboard man standing there and saying, you must be this big. You must be a child. Big people don't get in. The door is small, only humble, and you don't get to take all your stuff with you. It's a small door. But it leads to abundant life. D, the door will one day be shut. I haven't alluded yet, but Jesus told 2 parables. Remember about the bridegroom and the foolish bridesmaids, and the foolish maids came running. They finally got their oil, but the door was shut. And Jesus just pictures them. Open to us, open. And the ruler of the feast says it's too late. The door's shut. That's a reality. Jesus is the door. To receive him and believe in his name is what it means to walk through the door. And F, which I didn't leave the time I would want, but the great privilege of witnessing is to stand by the door. When Jesus gave Peter the keys to the kingdom, what was he doing? And of course, there's a lot of ink invested in this, but I think at least part of what he was saying was to Peter, to you in the church, you have keys that can open for others the door. That's what it means to be a witness, to be an evangelist. He was commissioning his followers to tell others where the door is. Sam Shoemaker, I want to close with this, who was one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote a poem called I Stand at the Door. How many know this poem? Oh, Mike knows it. There's a few, yeah. And I've already edited a good bit out of it. I'm not going to read it all, but he was an evangelist. And what he's saying in this poem is there's a door, and as an evangelist, it's my job to stand by the door and help people find the door. And he said the temptation is, as a follower of Christ, that I want to just go through the door and forget about all this crud on the outside. I want to just go in and be close to Jesus and forget about alcoholics and such on the outside. But he said, no, I stand by the door. Let me read. It's as brief. I stand by the door. I neither go too far in nor stay too far out. The door is the most important door in the world. It is the door through which men walk when they find God. There is no use my going way inside and staying there when so many are still outside and they, as much as I, crave to know where the door is. And all that so many ever find is only the wall where the door ought to be. They creep along the wall like blind men, with outstretched, groping hands, feeling for a door, knowing there must be a door, yet they never find it. So I stand by the door. The most tremendous thing in the world is for men to find that door, the door to God. The most important thing that any man can do is to take hold of one of those blind, groping hands and put it on the latch that only clicks and opens to the man's own touch. Men die outside the door as starving beggars die. On cold nights in cruel cities, in the dead of winter, they die for want of what is within their grasp. They live on the other side of it, live because they've not found it. Nothing else matters compared to helping them find it and open it and walk in and find Him. So, I stand by the door. Skip to the second column to I admire. I admire the people who go way in, but I wish they wouldn't forget how it was before they got in. Then they would be able to help the people who've not yet even found the door, or the people who want to run away again from God. You can go in too deeply and stay in too long and forget the people outside the door. As for me, I shall take my old accustomed place near enough to God to hear Him and know who He is, and know He's there, but not so far from men as not to hear them and remember they are there too. Where? Outside the door. Thousands of them, millions of them. But more important for me, one of them, two of them, 10 of them, whose hands I am intended to put on the latch. So I shall stand by the door and wait for those who seek it. I'd rather be a doorkeeper so I stand by the door. Isn't that good? Father, thank you tonight for your word and the chance just to think about that there is a door. And you don't just show us where it is, you are the door. And maybe the best way to end tonight is for us to think about those whose hand we need to prayerfully guide to the latch. Lord, forgive us when we leave the door and forget the door and go so far in we even forget what it's like out there. Thank you for people like Sam Shoemaker who just remind us that that's our place, right by the door, where we can hear your voice and their voices all at the same time. Help us hear our prayer. Speak to us even as we sleep tonight. In Jesus' name and for the sake of the kingdom we pray. Amen.